Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited about this episode today. Before I introduce you to our guest, here's a quote just for this episode. Hope and belief are a powerful cocktail for survival and to survive. This is a cocktail I mix up every day and serve to the masses. Finding the door is a metaphoric philosophy which provides a clear vision for all leaders who encourage others. Christine Beckwith, Finding Honor. Our guest today, author, speaker, leader for change, friend of the Culture Matters podcast, the one and only Christine Beckwith is back. We are talking about chapter 14, Finding the Door and Finding Honor, the Journey to the Truth. Thank you for coming back to the show. We're getting some really exciting feedback on these episodes.
I hope. Good. I'm enjoying sharing them, and my audience on my social, our social, is eating it up, and people are buying books and writing to me about what the impact of the book has been. So it really feels like Finding Honor is having its moment. It's I don't mind saying a shameless plug, which I haven't done, I don't think, during the recording of all these chapters, truly, and that is that this book is going into literary competition this year. Concertedly, we as a team are focused. We have an entire team of like 5 people that are working on applications to the biggest national book competitions. And they're out the door right now. Sometime around summer, those competitions will render its results. And I'm hoping that we take away some book awards. But yeah, Finding the Door, chapter 14. Was a really deep chapter in this book. Thank you for reading that quote. I love, of all the books, if you become an author, you like to like revisit your reading once in a while. I didn't really know when I started, because the first book took me 10 years. It took me writing for 3 years, setting it down for 7, having discouraging results during the first editing, which ended up not being discouraging results, but me not reading thoroughly to where the editor actually wrote. Long story. But was re-encouraged to write again, picked it back up. So the first book took 10 years. I don't think I knew I was writing to teach until that book came out, Wise Eyes See Your Way to Success. And it clearly had very tactical matter in it. It was very clear that you could write down in the first 9 chapters the steps that lead into what my now curriculum in my school teach, which is the Blueprint for Success. This is my last book that I wrote, and there's 5 books, and I've also written in 5 other people's books as a shared author, but my own books, I have 5 books. And so this book, by now I'm a better writer, right? When I'm writing Finding Honor, I know who I am as an author. I understand my voice as an author more. I understand my own writing style, the cadence of how I write. And so this book I knew was going to be a very deep, philosophical, psychological lesson book of my life. But when you get into areas where, and I know this is true, because I handed the book out to like 50 of my closest friends. And right away, it was a study in psychology, because I got some great friends. I got all great friends, but I got some honest friends and I got some friends that are liars. And I'm not going to label them or name them, obviously. You know who you are. um, the honest friends, they just peeled through this book and they wrote back long letters and, wow, this is like so deep and so, poignant, and this is the best writing you've ever done, and da 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 da. The liars went silent. A couple months later, I would go, "Hey, how did that go? How did reading Finding Honor go?" And they'd be like, "Well, I got busy and I set the book down and I didn't get all the way through it." Because it really turns you face forward into a mirror, this book. And now that I have a few dozen reviews on Amazon and growing, um, I can tell that this book grips the person that needs the lessons in this book, and it grabs them, it grabs a hold of them, and they can't set the book down. Like the number one common review is it we can't set it down. I can't set it down. Like they just sit, they read it in one sitting, they read it in 2 days, they, like it's gripping. And that's awesome. But where it doesn't grip is the person that's not ready for the message. It's the alcoholic that's hearing a loved one tell them they shouldn't drink. It's, the drug addict being told they need to quit. It's the smoker that's being told they should quit for their health. All things people probably know they need, and also a timing thing. So here's what I believe, and as I dive into finding the door rather, chapter 14, is that I believe this book is going to haunt the reader of people that aren't ready for the message, because I think once you read the lessons, you can't unsee them or hear them. And just like a person who's not ready to quit something but knows that they should, typically whoever's delivering that difficult lesson or message, those words will haunt the individual that's ignoring them until they seep in to the right time and place. And then, of course, there'll be a revelation, and then there'll be, a turning around. So finding the door, this chapter that we're going to unpack in this podcast episode, is literally about finding yourself in a place in your life where you feel like you're in a dark place. And so in my life, unfortunately, I have been in some pretty deep, dark places mentally. I would find myself in this place in the beginning of my life around 18 years old. Certainly not planned for, definitely, a side road from what I'd always dreamed the path I would be on at the beginning of my adult life. I would return to this dark place again at 28 years old, and then fight the dark place for the rest of my existence, and still to this day. I would say right now, as I'm being interviewed, ironically, I've just gone through some of the greatest tragedy of my life. And I've always known when life presents itself in difficult ways that I would be fighting the spiral of depression. And so ultimately, this is about an alternative way of digging yourself out of the spiral than where you end up going a lot of times psychologically without that type of help.
How do you dig out?
Well, I mean, you first kind of need to know you're there. What would save me again and again in my life is not knowing at 18 what was happening to me, and ending up down a very, very difficult in a very difficult place. It's hard for me to talk about, because I know what it looks like. I don't love being judged. I mean, the thing about putting yourself out there is you still know that there's people that judge you, and you still know that there's people that hate on you or don't like the TMI. And so as a professional that runs a consulting company with a lot of intelligent bankers and brokers across the nation, and somebody that, I feel have had a great career, talking about stuff like this is hard for me. But I've put the book out, and on point, I attempted suicide at 18 years old, and was found by my older sister, um, and saved in a very, even to this day when I talk about it, I know I was very serious. This wasn't a cry for help. That was it. I was done. I was in a dark place brought on by a bunch of circumstances. I was visiting home on a vacation from my first year of college, and being away from home, living away from home. And I ended up deciding to like take all the medicine in the medicine cabinet and write a letter. And I went into my mom and dad's bedroom, which is weird too. I don't even understand that. Um, and I laid down in their bed, and I left the note on the kitchen table, and nobody was home. And I did it really early in the morning, right after they left. And that was it. And I assumed that they would find me when they got home that night. And my sister had a feminine accident at her job, need I not describe more, causing her to come home for a change of clothes. It's as simple as that, like some weird accidental divine intervention. And would find the note, but I was completely unconscious and I would remain unconscious for 11 days. So it
Wow.
was not, you know, I don't remember going to the hospital by ambulance. I don't remember any of that. I do remember waking up and finding my father at the bottom of my bed and knowing that I was in a hospital, and it was very peaceful. I woke up and I was just, in this place, and he was reading the Bible of all things. And my life from there was forever changed because I knew then the symptoms and the things that I could recognize in order to avoid that place again in my life. And so finding the door is about describing the place of hopelessness because a lot of people get here. And I don't think you can describe it. It's like people that say they died and came back, those near death experiences. I don't talk about that, just so you know, because I didn't have that. I didn't have that experience at all. But what I would tell you is that you you're part of a very exclusive club if you can write about this intersection, because I don't think a lot of people get this far down that road to describe what hopelessness really feels like. But I am able in finding the door to talk about that place that you arrive at when all hope is gone. And I know it resonates with people that are on somewhere on that path. I think there's a lot of people that suffer with depression and they never get to that place where they're like going to take their life. But I think that they probably contemplate the alternative being less painful, if you will. And so finding the door is about, you know, finding your way out. And so it is about first steps out of that dark place. It is about walking away from and turning around from where you are. I describe the darkness as a guest that comes that's uninvited and won't leave. And I use that metaphor in this chapter to kind of make people feel at ease with knowing you didn't do this to yourself. You didn't make yourself depressed. You didn't will yourself to feel the way that you're feeling, brought on by circumstances life brings you, depending upon your own psychology and ability to have an inner voice that can correct. Um, it's circumstantial. Most people that are fighting some level of depression in their life, I love the word normal. Like, I love it when people refer to people that don't have depression as, well, normal people, the way they operate is, um, well, everybody's normal until they're abnormal. And everybody's not normal or on varied levels of normalness by someone's definition every single day of your life. I, for one, do not use that as my GPS. Like, I'm not trying to be normal. I'm trying to be what God gave me, which is this great, mind that does incredible things, that is tied to my articulation, my speech, my writing. I would argue that when you look at artists and you look at people that live, I think, outside the creativity realms of normalness defined by society, there's some artistic madness in that. I think writers have that ability to articulate their feelings on depth levels that other people never reach. I write in my book, I think it's sad for people that live within some sort of gray lines of emotionalness where they never reach the heights of, elation and, natural elation, not, drug induced or whatever. Um, so I'll stop there and let you ask any other questions that you have about this.
You talk about personal lives are never transparent at work and will take down the career of a good man or woman if not addressed. Learning to compartmentalize is vital both to protect yourself and your job. I gave my professionals emotional support by acknowledging their personal strife, suggesting resources, and asking them to set aside their woes while at work. I taught those who were willing to learn the important lesson the most successful people already knew. Everyone has problems at home. Successful people come to work to focus on work and not compound their situation with loss of income or job. But then you asked a question I thought was interesting. I want your thoughts on. Is it ego to look away from the downtrodden, or is it ego to try to raise up those who are capable but lost?
Mhm. Yeah. There's complexity in the way that we innately think as human beings. I'll be the first to admit, I have all of the things that are damned in the Bible and damned in society as hating, jealousy. Like I feel all the gamut of emotions. Um, I think our egos is another word for what we'll tolerate in terms of letting the world in to know who we are. And so our ego is kind of like the person that's going to introduce us on a stage, meaning it goes before us and it tells the world who we are. Okay. And so if we're in control of our ego, we have some say in what it's saying. We're able to, you know, put the words in the mouth of our presenters and then we represent ourselves as who we want the world to know we are. I think sometimes in life we want it to be an A+ report card and we want to look shiny and bright and perfect. I think that's happening as teenagers. I think there's kids out of fear of embarrassment, they're beginning to develop egos as teenagers. They'll hide a lot of strife and things because they know it's not acceptable, at least in the realm of their eyesight. It takes a really strong parental home to negate what they're feeling and seeing and experiencing at school. And a lot of us have a lot of damage done, and we see a lot of damage done. I saw a ton of damage done to other students growing up. Probably because I was sitting in a place that was getting crapped on as a poor girl. The kids around me were just getting, everything happening to them, whether it was their lunches being stolen or their clothes being picked on or being told they were lesser in some way, shape, or form. I sat next to the kids that were shamed. And that begged me to ask myself at a very young age, was I like the people that was doing the shaming, or was I one of the kids that was to be shamed? And I got fierce. As a young girl, I write in Breaking the Cycle in the opening chapter titled Hope that I considered myself like the playground superhero in life. Like I would run into the fire of those houses burning down by other kids that were picking on other kids. And I tell a story about this epileptic child that is the child of coworkers of my parents who on Saturday nights, my parents and their parents would play cards. And probably not a girl I would have picked to be a friend with, but I considered a friend by association, and she got totally, totally picked on every day at school. And one day I inserted myself into this situation. Um, and as the story goes, the moment I thwarted the bullying of the tossing of her hat, which was ripped off her head, and all this shit, I ran around the school building and I bawled my eyes out because now all the adrenaline kind of dropped out of the bottom of my fierceness, and I was faced with how scary that had just been, that kind of I had gone on this autopilot defense mode to protect her. And I remember in my writing I was giving you guys, like, I wanted to bring you into the moment of standing onto the wall, and I said as I stood there I could see my breath. It was cold outside and I was breathing heavy, and I could hear nothing. Like the school buses were coming, it was loud, the kids were outside, and it was completely silent where I was standing, just like muted. And in that like moment, I just realized God had made me like some sort of thing that was wired a certain way. And so when I write about ego and hope, which is kind of funny because I'm manifesting what I already wrote about and breaking the cycle in the chapter hope, is that we allow people to hear what we're willing to live with. And so I see the people that live on the surface of who they are. I see the people that are projecting themselves a certain way. And this is hypocritical because I have a marketing team that makes me look a certain way on social media. They're exploiting my expertise. And while that sells consulting and it's necessary to sell consulting, that's not my whole story. And I'm thankful today that I tell my whole story because God forbid, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum now. I don't want the world to think I'm perfect. In fact, I want to really present myself as the teacher that I am because of the set of experiences that I have.
Last question. Someone listening to this that has a child that they intuit could potentially be at risk to do what you were challenged with in your adolescence earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
What's your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think my parents in the busyness of their lives at that point in my life and me having been away at school and was coming home, I really didn't give them much insight into my actual feelings or thinking. You know, you come home to visit and your parents say, "How's school going? How's life going?" And mind you, I had left home and at the beginning of that summer, and my mom stood on the doorstep literally as I was leaving that day and shamed me because she didn't want me to leave. And my mother wasn't very good at figuring her own feelings out. So she would often project her sadness or hurt and anger. And I didn't know that then because it felt very hurtful, but I do now understand what she was feeling that day. But she said, "You'll be back." You know, she didn't want me to go. She wanted me to stay home for the summer, and I was ready to leave. It was literally 7 days after I graduated high school. My older sister was taking me to drop me off. No car, a few $100s in my pocket, and a couple of boxes of stuff. And so I wasn't in a position out of my own ego, which is why this is written about in this chapter. I didn't write about this specific story, but the reason that ego is written about is that I literally would end up realizing as I was coming home that I wanted my parents to think that everything was perfect. I wanted them to think that everything was, you know, there weren't any problems. And so I wasn't ever explaining, um, you know, hey, I'm going through problems. Hey, I'm using at the time, you know, substances that are being introduced to me by other kids and whatnot. Sorry. It's the fucking damning of my life, I'm telling you right now, these dogs. Um, Bye, Jagger. I've already screwed the podcast up. Come over here and give me a kiss. Try to get them to go downstairs if you can. Say hi to Jay.
Hey,
Bye,
buddy.
Jay.
Hey, you know what? This is the real stuff that we should keep in the podcast because frankly, that's what it's all about. Culture. I mean, think about this for a second. Now,
Yeah,
this is my observation. Earlier in this conversation, when you were his age, you just shared what you shared earlier. And
yeah.
now at the end of this episode,
My
you're
18-year-old son, who's going to be 18 on February 26th, yes, of this month, only
funny, says
14
hi,
days from now. Can you believe it?
and
Yeah,
your
I mean, you
sister
asked the
saved
question and
you.
I didn't answer. I do want to say this. Um, don't make your kids feel like when they leave home that there's any reason they can't come back or tell you what they're experiencing because
Mm.
my mother's departing words were like, "You'll come crawling back, you'll fall down on your face, you know, you're not going to succeed." You know, she knew I was leaving with limited means. I had a job but hadn't gone to it yet. I didn't know if it'd work. I was, she didn't want me to leave. So she was kind of telling me, like, you're gonna fail type of thing. And I know what she was going through. By the way, she was super young. My mother was so young at this age. She was in her 30s, herself. And so she didn't have life lessons at that point. I was the first one leaving home, by the way. My older sister had not left home yet. And so I'm like literally the first like bird leaving the nest, if you will. And so when I came home, I sugarcoated everything. And I sugarcoated myself right into isolation because I
Mm.
had nobody to talk to. And so my advice to answer your question is when Jagger gets ready to leave this year, and he does leave, um, my conversation's going to be different. Because of my experience, my conversation's going to be like, look, try not to get into trouble. But if you find yourself down some road where you are, you can call me. It doesn't matter if it's 2 in the morning and you've been left behind by friends at a party and there's shit going on that you don't agree with and you need a ride, I'm your girl. If are depressed and struggling at school, call me. You know, if you get with a girl and she breaks up and you're heartbroken, call me. I'm going to go through it because I had so much going on and I was living in such a dangerous place in my life that I felt ashamed of myself. That was part of what led me to my depression is I had been introduced to a lot of things in college and where I was living, and I didn't like myself anymore. And I felt hopeless and I didn't know how to get out of the place that I was in. And I felt like I was in trouble, but didn't want to admit it. And so, but it was a very perpetual place in my life because I would recover from that place and I would leave where I was living as a result of that incident. And it put me on a trajectory that led me to where I'm sitting right now, which is a better path in life. And my successes would rack up as I went on. Um, I lost sight of that somewhere in my life and I became overconfident. We forget sometimes how slippery the slope is. And at 28 years old, after I started earning a six-figure income repetitively, 26, 27, 28 years old, I ended up in a breakup that was kind of shocking with my first husband. And I had a really depressing situation occur in our marriage. And I went right back down the slope again. And you would have never guessed it because I was starting to win sales contests. I had money suddenly. And there I was again in a depressed place. And I got clinically depressed. And I wrote about that also in Breaking the Cycle for the first time ever publicly. And the editors pushed me to write about it. Actually, my co-author, Wendy Wright, who's a doctor and my childhood friend, she knew I had gone through that. And when I got done writing Breaking the Cycle, she came back to me and she said, why didn't you write about that? And I said, yeah, it's not really a pretty part of my life. And she said, Christine, this is exactly why we're writing this book. Like this book needs to be about people breaking the cycle. And you getting depressed at 18 and again at 28 is a cycle. It's a cycle that needs breaking. How do you tell the world that you broke it? Because you've never been back to where you ended up again at 28. And so that's true. And so I wrote about it in that book at a very deep level. I actually got saved from ultimate demise at 28 because there was a coworker that worked with me in my job at the time that was a counselor, and he recognized that I was showing the traits of depression at that time. And I hadn't been to work for 3 or 4 days. And he came and he stood at my door and knocked until I came to the door. And I didn't want to go to the door and I was really sick. And I ended up hospitalized for over 30 days. I had lost like a ton of weight. And yeah, it's funny how these things happen because I could, say I owe my older sister my life. I could say I owe this man who had the intuition to say something's not right and act on it. That's why I never sit on the sidelines today. People look at me sometimes and they say, oh, that man, that girl or that guy is abusing your time. Um, because they see somebody that may be sad, sorry, sappy. And I will say this. I have an incredible amount of patience for people that are going through something. If I recognize that somebody is sick versus somebody that's just perpetually dramatic or perpetually bringing bad shit onto themselves or perpetually mean or evil or whatever, I'll sit with the sick person a long time. Because I just feel like it's my debt of gratitude back to the universe for those people that came to sit with me. Finding the door is a chapter in my life that's hard to talk about. But I can't tell you how many people have personally written to me. And I use it like medicine. I told you at the beginning to kind of end this whole podcast, I now write to teach and I write to give lessons, and I'm very clear in the way that I write. Even with my sixth book that I'm writing right now, I'm writing very on a lesson-based type of storytelling, but lesson-based writing style, which, I know now I'm gonna use my literary work to teach, in my living self. And hopefully after I'm gone, the book serves as its own teacher. The books do. Um, but finding the door helps me connect to people that need it. At least 6 times this past week, I've read posts on social media and then personally written messages to individuals where I said, hey, can I send you a copy of my book? It looks like you're going through something. I think this book could really help you. And I think it's something that would help you right now. I've had, and what I say is I've had books and people come to help me at times that were really pivotal. And I just really think this would help. Would you give me your address? And I'll pen a book to them and go to the mailbox. And it's completely my pleasure to do that for them. And I'll earmark this chapter.
Hmm. Christine, thank you for coming back.
Yeah.
Impactful episode. If you're listening to this podcast, please share this to someone that you know needs to hear this. Follow Christine. Leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast so we can get the word out. And we'll see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.